All right, so a little bit about myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Leslie, and I have been involved in Megagames for almost, since 2013, when we first found out about Megagames and the infamous video came out. And so since then, I've been quite involved on and off, and perhaps I'm a little bit unique in that I've only played actually in one Megagame. I've controlled in a couple just as needed. So my experience and my passion about Megagames actually really is the logistics part of it all. So I'm really happy to speak about that with you guys and to share what I've learned. And I would love to also learn from those of you who have run, I think, many more games and have learned perhaps different things. And I also want to acknowledge that I think that Megagames in the US is probably a little bit different than in the UK. There's a cultural difference, and there's also the way that I think some of the groups have formed or initially formed in the UK and elsewhere. So those are things that I'll touch upon as we go here. So let's just get started. And the other thing I just want to say is these are just my opinions, so and my experience. So by no means are these the only things, but I do think that one of the things that I've run into in the last couple of years, especially with running games at Gen Con, is that oftentimes people don't really consider the logistics of running a mega game. And I think that when you've thought about those pieces and thought about the player experience and the controller experience, that can make a significant difference in how your game runs and how the mechanics flow. I also want to say that for the most part, I've always had, there was somebody who was running the game. And so my role really is just thinking about all the other bits and pieces that aren't the game mechanics. But I'll speak to those pieces as well. So. And also just so you know, I'm hosting, so if I have to let people in and I pause and I'm looking elsewhere, it's just because I'm making sure that those who want to be with us are with us. So like I said, I've been actively hosting mega games since 2015. We really first started running our first mega game in 2014, and I'll go into that a little bit. And I've only played one game, so that's one thing. By trade now, in part because of mega games, to be honest, I've become an event planner. And a training coordinator. And so that is what I do. I live in this world, and I think about this a lot. And I think about this on small and on large scales. And so that's just a little bit. My personal goal with mega games, and I think for those of you who maybe were part of yesterday's gender panel, gender inclusivity panel, is I think that mega games can be an incredible opportunity for people who are afraid of games. When they think of board games, they get really intimidated. And I think that if a game is well facilitated, they can, somebody can show up and really be sort of supported through a game. And so that's often been our goal. And our goal has been to encourage all those different people who would avoid playing a game to really come and play. So, and my personal goal with pretty much anything that I do is building community. And so I'm always finding ways to do that, whether it's within the player base or within our controllers. And I'll speak a little bit more to how I've learned to do that over the years with the controllers who've come to us, and where we've also sort of ended up recruiting controllers from. And over the years, I've really also used mega games as just an opportunity to make new friends. So, if you're spending your time doing something, this is hopefully something you're really enjoying. So, all right, so I'll talk a little bit about organization logistics, and again, as very, very key things to thinking about mega games. When you invite a lot of people into a room, you have to think about how things are going to flow and what's not going to work potentially, and then what you're going to do to strategize those. And I think one of the wonderful things that mega games do is you have to be really quick to think on your feet. And so over the years, I think for those of you who've perhaps been doing this a lot longer, you're really good at this. But for newbies who are coming in, who don't have a player base, and who don't have people who can think about those things, I just want to encourage us to think about those things. So, so I'll share what I do. I also have resources and materials. I'm not going to give those to you guys today, but I do have some great things that I can offer for new people, just to look at. By no means you have to adopt it, but I think it's always helpful to look at those things. So, all right, so I just, by show of hands, using the little hand clicking feature, if you can, when you click on the more button in the chat, just how many of you guys have run mega games, and if I'm just curious who's new and who's experienced in the group. Alrighty, great. And if you can't find that, you can also visually raise your hand if you're on video. But all right, so we've got some newbies in the group, and I imagine we also have some experienced people here, so that's good. We got a little bit of a mix. So I'm chuckling because Dave Boundy is here, and Dave was actually part of our first mega game experience. So he's hats off to Dave and to the UK guys. Alrighty, I also want to, I'll create a space at the end for you to sort of share, but if you've run mega games, I'd love to know areas that have gone poorly for you or that you would love to improve, just so we can also learn from each other and thinking about those things. Yeah. All right, so mega games, I had a conversation with John Cleveland, who's my counterpart at West Coast Megagames last night, and he said, well, they're not just about, mega games are not just about the games and rules, that's for sure. And we've really focused on mega games as an experience. So what is it like from the beginning when somebody finds out about a mega game all the way to the end? So what's the language we're using? How are we encouraging people? How are we hyping them up for the experience? All those pieces. And because everybody who's working with us is a volunteer, how are we ensuring that they're part of an experience and that they're excited to show up and are motivated to really do the best that they can in their various roles? So I've been at Gen Con for a couple of years, and I've also helped organize our MGC's Gen Con presence for a number of years from afar. And I've seen how different groups have run their games, and when we don't think through the logistics, it can be a bit of a nightmare. Like it's frustrating for the players, it's frustrating for the controllers, and so just thinking about those things can be really very important. And I also have this idea that mega games are a reflection of the culture, and so the culture of the group that's running them. You know, how do people communicate with each other? How well do they know each other? All those things can be really felt in an event, and mega games are no different. And I think this point about having a really strong group of locally interested players is really key. It's incredibly challenging for groups. And I think this is why we see a lot of groups that will they'll host one game and they disappear. They can't sustain it because they don't know how to retain interested players. And that could be part of what the Mega Game Assembly was speaking about yesterday. Maybe it's the price point. Maybe people just want to have a one-time experience. But I think that a lot of it also has to do with how are you encouraging them to continue to be interested? And if you've thought through all the things, is this a taxing experience for you? Or is this a really exciting experience for you? And mega games are exhausting. So let me be very clear about saying that you'll walk away energized and exhausted after a day of a mega game, of course, but you want to ensure that people are interested in sticking around. Otherwise, you will have a one-time event. And that's fine for people who decide to do that. Yeah, and I agree. I think that like certain games also require that you really have experienced controllers. And I know that just through conversations with some of the UK guys, especially at the Mega Game Makers, when you've been doing it for a long time, people learn the rules differently and have a sort of a faith in one another. But for new games, where you don't have that, I encourage us to think differently. You have to think about that. And I'll speak a little bit about what we've learned about that. And again, I think that one of the differences between the way that we work at West Coast Mega Games is that we have a logistical way of thinking about things. We have a background of event planning and community building. So that plays into it, and that's not everybody's strong suit, and that's totally fine, which is part of why I just want to open the conversation. And I also wanted to just say, like, here's a resource for people who want to talk about this piece, because I love talking about this, and it's not what everybody wants to talk about. And my last point is, I often hear people talking about, well, mega games are chaotic. And that's true to an extent, but that chaos has to be designed chaos and not chaos because you didn't think things through. And now you're sort of on the fly in a way that's, is just, you want to be thoughtful about the chaos that you're doing it. We call it, we don't throw spaghetti at the wall. And I do see that a lot, right? Where okay, you've got your materials and people shown up, but did you really train them to think through the rules if they're controllers? Did you really help your players and answer questions? When you have a 20 or 30-minute turn, sort of phase, that's a lot of pressure, and I've seen extraordinary frustration for players when they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing and where they need to go. And I think it's different when they don't know what strategy they want to employ in order to affect the outcome that they want, but they shouldn't be distracted by the fact that they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. And that comes down to communication, I think, and to also just having people be really aware of what's happening at that time. So mega games should be designed. And then I think the other thing is, sometimes a group only forms around one individual. So one person goes, I saw the video, or I went to Gen Con and I really love mega games and now I want to put on a mega game. And being one person putting on a mega game is an extraordinary feat. So you really have to have a group of people who are interested in being part of that with you. And you have to sort of know what the skills are in the group and play to that. And I think that we do that when we think about maybe, well, this person is really great at negotiation. For example, I'm going to take, because most people have a common foundation with Watch the Sky, so I'm going to use this as my example. But I'm going to put them into the UN and have them facilitate that. They're really good at helping people learn how to negotiate. Or they're really good at long form board games. I'm going to put them into strategy and have them really manage the map. Whatever it is, I mean, you have to think about those things. You can't just say, I'm putting people in as though I don't understand what skills they're bringing. You want to make sure that you have conversations with people also to know what they're passionate about and comfortable with. And I think this is an area for us, for example, at Gen Con, that we're learning, where we have a sort of a returning group of volunteers who come every year and join us, and that's fantastic. So we have a foundation, but we also open up the call to volunteers from anywhere. And so we get these volunteers who maybe they were a D&D GM at one point, or a LARPer, or they really just want to come for the free badge. Now we have to coach that person, and we have to figure out how in the world we're going to get them to play with us in a way that's helpful to the game. And which game we're going to put them in, not just because their time availability is open for the slot, but really which game do we think they're best suited for, and that's something that I think we're learning to vet for more. And I think you have to do that locally as well. So we do, for all of our games, we have a volunteer form where we have them fill out. So we have a sense first of like, where do you want to be? What do you want to really be involved in, and how can we play to that? So that's something to think about. And I think that the other thing, which I don't see a lot of, frankly, is really proactive communication. If you're asking people to participate with you, you have to, from start to finish, you have to be willing to communicate with them. You have to reach out, you have to tell them what the expectations are. You also have to be good at addressing things that aren't working and do some conflict management. That's all part of it. And some people are really well suited to that, and it's challenging for other people, and it's exhausting. You have to have extraordinary stamina, I think, to do this kind of work. So, so my strategy has been that I'm desperately, constantly trying to convince people that community matters, because it means that they're coming back. Right? And you can work through these things, and you start to create a communication flow with them. And so locally for West Coast Megagames, what we've often done is we have board game nights. We have a giant wall of board games, and we have a co-op, and we invite people to our board game events. So that's just one strategy for community building, and I'll get to that a little bit more. So I'm going to get a little bit more into the practicalities of what I've learned in running mega games from the logistical side. I'm a notes person. I'm a task person. I like to have different tools. I love all the tools that are coming out, the digital tools now that are for task management, and I just geek out on these things. It's not for everybody, but having something as your tool, I think, is really important, because then you can start to understand all the pieces and how they're interconnected. So we're a little bit different in that WCM, we've only redesigned games. We've never written our own game. And most of the ideas of a game and having and hosting a game comes because somebody decided to have the idea. Whether it was myself, I said, hey, look, I think it's time for a mega game, or somebody said, we would love to have you come out and host a mega game, whatever it is. So we're a little bit different in that. I think there's a whole piece to pre-game to-dos that have to do with designing the game, testing the game, all those pieces. And I can't speak to those in this way. So I'm speaking to, you have a game and you're ready to host your game. What does that look like? So of course you identify the game you're going to host, the date you're going to do it. And you have to really, I think, figure out your goals. And this is where some of the complexity comes in, which not every group has to face, but there are commonalities. Location can be extraordinarily important. So for us, we have sort of over the years figured out that about 50% of our attendees, they come from 2 or 3 hours away. So they will drive a fair amount of distance to get here or take the train in. And so we make sure, for example, that we're close enough to a freeway. We're not asking people to like drive through the suburbs and far away and have to navigate all these things, because that actually adds to the stress of the player, or a controller who's coming from a far away. So we've made that actually a goal. That's not everybody's goal, but that's actually really important to us, which means that when I'm looking for locations, because we often have to choose different venues, and I'll get to that, I sort of have to like say, no, we can't, these are not options for us, because that's a goal. We want to make it easy to get to. We also always have to figure out who our audience is, and who we're sort of hoping will come, and or, you know, if we've been hired or invited to an event. So who is our audience, and adjust our game accordingly, the way we communicate about our game accordingly. So we do put a lot of effort towards that. It's not just like, I expect that you're really good at understanding the rules, because again, our goal is to make games inviting to everybody, which means that we're breaking down our communication in a different way. And we're really trying to make it seem not overwhelming. So we don't want to just throw the playbook at them. We really want to help them understand what that is. And then in more recent years, I think, especially since Discord became really, really big, we open up a Discord for our players, and we answer their questions. We have somebody who's moderating that very actively. And you're always get the players who read the rule book and are super excited, and you're always going to get those people who don't read it at all. And so you plan for that. So we keep that in mind when we think about our audiences. We also think about our resources. So I know that there are groups that maybe they have access to a free venue. Fantastic, I envy you. There are groups that maybe they have a print house, so they get to print their own materials. Excellent, I envy you. Or, you know, maybe they have already a built-in control team. That's amazing. Congratulations. These are not things that we have. So we've really had to learn how to navigate all those pieces ourselves. So we come up with a plan every time. We use a great strategy to track our tasks, and also something that everybody can track whatever tasks are assigned to them, what's expected of them. And then we train them in that. So as benign as it sounds at times, and as boring as it is, we really have a training session where like, this is our communication tool, and here's how we'd like you to use it. So just in the chat, I would love to know, what's the biggest game that you've run? Just so I have a sense of that too, because that is a huge factor, I think, in some of the games. So if you are willing to chime in into the chat, the largest game you've run and the number of people who showed up. All right, Mega Game Makers, you guys are amazing. Excellent. So we've had a group that had 2 days, 130, 17 players. Excellent. Yeah, and this is great. I mean, these are all, yeah, there we go. Okay, thank you so much. That gives me a good sense. When we started running Mega Games, we were hearing that like most people running games for 45. At WECM, we shoot for 60 or more usually. And our largest game was 80 players with 20 controllers. So we had 100 people in the room for 8+ hours. We had to figure out how to navigate that. We can be weirdly ambitious sometimes, I think. Excellent. So when we start a game, we start 3 to 4 months out from game day to think about the logistics. We start, like I said, we start assigning sort of who's going to be on what team. We have people who really love to edit, so we encourage them to edit and reread our rules. We are always constantly improving our games, even if they're redesigns of other games that we've sort of gotten our hands on. So we end up every time rewriting some of the rules, which means that we're also always hosting playtesting. And playtesting is actually great for our controllers when we're training them, because then they start to understand the frustration that a player might have, what they need to do to communicate that. So we take advantage of that. That's part of our strategy. And then the other thing that we always do is we have a group of us, or one person, who's really in charge of the planning and the logistics. We also think about marketing outreach because we have to do that. And then we also think about the registration process. And then John has largely been in charge of our control team and sort of the community building around that piece. So we always need more time. When we're planning, even with 3 to 4 months out, there's just always more that we find that we could do better. And we always make sure that we're really documenting, okay, so for next time we run this game, we want to do this, we want to improve this aspect. We also always really make sure that we have an opportunity to really wrap up. So that's when we start, we think about that whole arch. So like I said, we have no built-in audience. So our hurdles are answering the question of what's a mega game and going out and talking to people about mega games. We don't have a venue that's built in, so I'm always venue hunting. I've got a great spreadsheet of all of our, all sorts of wonderful venues in Sacramento for all kinds of things, and all sorts of wonderful venues in the Bay Area, so west of us in San Francisco area, for those of you who are familiar with California geography. And we also have run games in some other states. So we went to Arizona. We had a venue there, but we still had to figure out some of those logistical pieces. So, and we also have to constantly recruit volunteers. So the first game when we ran Sengoku in 2014, like we brought our friends in. You know, they were happy to help us for this really interesting initiative that we were doing. I just want to point out here in the very background, I don't know if you can see this, that's Dave sitting in the background. So Dave came out for our first mega game, not intimidating at all. He was lovely to work with, and we've been so pleased to just have him as our mega game friend on the other side of the pond. So just wanted to share that picture. So, so one of the things that's really important for us is consistency. Again, so being as available for everybody, but also for ourselves. It keeps us accountable, it keeps us on our timeline. So we meet regularly with our team. And similarly for OMG Con, we just met regularly, of course. We had a very short period that we decided to throw the con in. We gave ourselves less than anything I'm suggesting here. So we decided in June, when it was becoming clear that Gen Con probably wouldn't happen, that we would, that we wanted to do something, and we started sort of putting feelers out. Would anybody be interested in sort of a virtual online conference? What would that look like? But really, I think we started really working maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. So very short period of time to run this, but then you really have to have consistency. So I also, aside from this like little presentation here, I think that just being a talking head and talking and reporting in is only so helpful. So actually working together, I find that more and more people are extraordinarily busy, and they have the best of intentions of doing what they say they're going to do, but then they don't have time to do it. So we actually create working meeting times. And so that's an opportunity for people to do work, for example, on if they're doing their design work, they're working together. Sometimes we have everybody come together and break out into little groups and do work. If they're doing marketing, they come together. If they're writing emails, whatever it is, that nobody is ever, that way we're helping each other be accountable. And we also then in the moment can see the problems and talk about them. So that's been one of our strategies, is just what I would call like a working meeting as opposed to a reporting in meeting, which I just find are really inefficient. And it gives you an opportunity to get to know them better, and it builds that community piece, and it makes them feel really interested because they're like working alongside people, getting to know them. Those are things that we as human beings like. I have come to think of the logistics of mega games as kind of like my own fun mega game. So this is my way of communicating with the various teams. And I think that we have well, you know, every time we have people who are new to mega games, and it makes them enthusiastic about what they're about to encounter. They don't know, maybe they're a player, but we've actually had people who have no idea what we're talking about, but they've found out about this and they're really interested in making it happen. So this might be different for people in other parts of, you know, the mega game community, but this has been our experience. So I'm just going to take a brief segue, which is we have done an insane amount of outreach when I think about it, to get our games off the ground every time, from the get-go. So this picture on the left hand is the very first thing that we did, which was that for that Sengoku Mega Game in 2014, John Cleveland went on our local public TV and tried to explain a mega game to this guy who literally was just trying to fill his time slot. Like, it was very evident. He was like, I don't know what this thing is. I got an email about it, whatever, sure. And John goes on and is trying to explain what a mega game is to this guy. And it was the most awkward and funny thing. But what's really funny too is John had never experienced a mega game. He had watched the video. A friend had introduced him to the video. He watched the video and he said, I think I could do that. And then he did it. And so in the other picture here on the right-hand side is John holding up one of the drafts of our Sengoku map and talking about this to a group of game designers. So that's been one of the groups that we have really tried over time, an audience, is to reach out to other designers because they want to talk about game design and they want to get involved. And we've had a few people get involved from that. And over the years, they've gotten really excited. Maybe there were video game designers or board game designers, and they've kind of migrated over to mega games because it's kind of a really interesting area to be involved in. So, but we've done, I swear, we have done everything I can think of. We have been to conventions. We have tabled at nerd events. We have tabled at community events. We've tabled at like Ren Fair events. Just anywhere where people who like anything related possibly to mega games would be at. We've been there. We've done emails. We've done podcasts. We've done video, TV. I have tried it all. We've gone to Rotary clubs. We've gone to Boy Scouts. We even for a little while were working with a university with their business department because they wanted to look at mega games. And I know some people are great at this as a team building strategy. And so, I mean, and there's so much opportunity within mega games, and I think that's what's exciting. But when I was putting this presentation together, I was like, man, I have tried and failed so much, but I'm trying. And every time we get somebody over, you know, and it's work when you don't have that built-in group. And I think that's been the tough thing for groups if you don't have the built-in player base. You know, if you don't have your university's board game club or role-playing club or LARP club, whatever it is, that's really tough. And we've gone to those groups. We've gone to the model UNs. We've talked to them. And every time we garner interest. But it's just, for those of us, who are like in our own little worlds, it's a tough piece. And I think that can be taken for granted by groups that don't have that challenge. So, and so we've also made it a little bit more difficult for ourselves in that we really try to put on a whole experience, which means that we really put a lot of effort into the quality of our materials. I was a little bit disheartened by the Mega Game Assembly survey. I was like, but the materials are so fun and beautiful and well meant, you know, but so we put a lot of effort into our materials. We really try to make sure our games are really accessible. And again, that they're easy for people to participate in. So yeah, this is another shot. So for those of you who don't know, one of the things that we might be a little bit more well known for is that we have the giant hollow globe. It's a wooden structure with a magnetic outer layer, and then all the pieces are magnet. Fantastic, beautiful beast of an idea that, you know, so this is the model for it. It's made out of styrofoam. We would cart this thing with us everywhere, and people would be like, what's this globe thing you've got? And then we got them to talk about mega games, and usually we get the sort of, after a while, like numb nod. But I just put this in here. That is probably one of the things we're most well known for at this point. But so like I said, we've been to everything. It's been a wild ride when I think about how much I've sent people out to talk about mega games over the years. So I would love to know how many of you guys have a challenge with talking about mega games and recruiting players. So if you do, just like raise your hand. If you have a built-in group, again, you're like, I'd love to know what it's like to be in your shoes. Alrighty. So some of you have some challenges getting players. I appreciate that. I really sympathize. Happy to chat with you about your challenges at any point about that too. So I think people don't think about how expensive mega games can be, and when you host them, they're an investment. Like that's a thing, and I think that also can be one of the deterrents for people who decide they run a game, they think I'm going to do this forever, and they end up sinking a lot of money in it. So our goal is always to just make it out, and this is a good game. This is our goal, and you'll notice we came out with like almost $200 after we paid for everything. So this is not a money-making event for us, and this is really about I think just creating an experience, and we have a hobby that's fantastic, but we don't want to lose too much money on this hobby in particular, I think so. And I also put out what our fees this is sort of a standard ticket for us, and we do a sort of a reg windows to help encourage and garner interest. People like deadlines to the extent that when they feel like they're about to miss out on a great opportunity, they respond. So we've learned that having sort of these ticketed windows of like early and regular and late is actually really, really helpful and super. It gets people in the door. So we do that. One of the things that we've learned over the years too is negotiate. So venues is our biggest cost, as you'll see here. This is a cheaper year for us at a less expensive venue. We try not to spend more than $1,500 for a day on the venue, but we are in a space for about 12 hours when you include setup and takedown and all these things, and so that's expensive. You look first oftentimes at the rate and hourly rate of a venue and you go, oh, that's affordable. But until you're actually like clocking the numbers and then all the add-ons, it adds up. People often don't think, especially in the US, you need to have an event insurance in case something goes wrong. You don't want that on your shoulders. If you were making and printing materials, these things add up. So here I have a budget, I have a template I can send you. This is just a very simple version of it. A few things I've learned over the years, especially in the States, nonprofits. There are some nonprofits that will allow you to umbrella under them, so you can actually benefit from their nonprofit status and get discounts at venues if you ask venues. A lot of venues won't tell you about that, so you have to say, hey, do you have a nonprofit rate, just out of curiosity? And what I've discovered, which is part of why we move around a lot with venues, is they'll offer you a great deal the first time around. And so take that. You might not be able to come back. So we found this amazing venue for our second Watch the Skies. I mean, it was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. We had different rooms. Everything was audio, like engineered. There was video. It was beautiful and spacious, and everything was movable. And it was only affordable for us one time because we got an amazing bargain. And I negotiated. This is, again, take your game skills, negotiation, strategy, whatever it is, and then employ that in the logistics of your mega game. There's no reason not to ask. The worst thing is you get a no, and maybe the person's a little disgruntled with you, but be nice about it, and they'll work with you for sure. That's been my experience, and I've been in a number of venues, both for mega games and in my professional life, and so it never hurts to ask. Almost all the numbers you see are inflated. And acknowledge, of course, that they have what they need to run their staff and their security or whatever else it is, but ask. And I think a lot of people don't do that. So the other things to think about are your volunteers, because they're one of your greatest assets. They also come with incredible resources over time. We've had, volunteers who help build our website, volunteers who help to supply us with materials, volunteers who happen to be part of a print house. And not that they're always there, but when they're there and they're able to offer that, that's fantastic. So working with them and appreciating them is really important, and making it worth their time. And the ways that you make that worth their time is when they're there with you, you don't waste it. Again, making that time a working time makes it more worth their time, has been my experience. and figure out what incentivizes them. So like I said, we have our board game co-op, and largely that's actually been built because we happen to have recruited a lot of board gamers who really want to play board games, and they're looking for people who they can play with regularly. So in my tiny little house, once or twice a month, we were hosting board game nights. And that was open to them, and I would feed them, because also food is an incentive for a lot of people. These are the things you do. If there's a meeting, by the way, feed them something, offer them drinks. Like that's all part of their sense of well-being and their time not being wasted. And if they feel good when they're with you, they'll probably continue to feel good about you. So that's really important. Be interested in what they're interested in and finding ways to bring that in. So that hollow glue of a beast was because we had a group of people who had a great brainstorming session and period of sessions and wanted to create something really incredible, and they did. You know, they're not carrying that, it lives in my shed. But that's one of those things, is like, be open to their ideas and incorporate those. And again, I think people want to be involved in interesting things. They want to be involved in things that they feel like are different from what other people might be doing, so that when they talk to their friends outside of the mega game community, outside of their board game community, whatever else is, they've got something really interesting to talk about. If they've got really interesting pictures to show on social media, that's fun, right? So these are things to think about to really incentivize them. I think the other thing is, and this is perhaps just more my personality, but like, let them know that you're there. And I'm not saying like be their best friend or be their therapist, but like, you're there and you appreciate who they are as a human being. Occasionally you get a volunteer who's overly enthusiastic and they want to sit there and talk about everything for 4 or 5 hours, and they're really on about something. And maybe you don't have the bandwidth for that, but do find a way to like be responsive to that, because they have incredible resources to offer you, their time, their interest. If they want to talk about those things, then guess what kind of controller they're going to be. They're going to be an enthusiastic controller who shows up with energy, and that's really what you want. You want somebody with the stamina to keep going. So I always think a supportive controller is a better ally. So I already talked a little bit about this. Great resources as your volunteers there. And just acknowledge them. I think that we forget that sometimes. We'll say like a thanks at the very end, but like, as you go, acknowledge them, because they are giving you your time. And similarly, your players, like, so I think by nature, I try to be pretty customer service oriented. So I want to make sure that I'm responsive in my emails to people or into social media. If I'm posting something, I better be tracking it. If we have a Discord server, we should better be monitoring that. Don't create things that you can't manage. Just don't. Like, there's no point. Create the thing that you can manage, and be responsive there. Because the reality of it is not everybody can do these things. So I recognize that. But what you take on, make sure you can actually take on. If you can't take it on, see if somebody else in your volunteer base can take it on. Maybe you have somebody who's very enthusiastic about that, or who's really good at emails, or whatever it is. And can help you do those things. So players respond well, like I said, to someone who's responsive, especially when they're registering. If they are new to a mega game, there's usually a few more questions. If they don't know what's going on, they feel uncertain, they will project that, right? And if you have like a Discord server, that's going to be the person who posts a whole lot and has a whole lot of questions. Now, you always want to encourage their questions. You always want to remind them that there's no dumb question, but you also want to proactively try to answer those questions before they ask them. The other thing I'm going to tell you, though, in my experience, is you can articulate everything incredibly clearly, and there's going to be a reality that somebody will not have seen it or read it. Be patient with that person. Like, I think we can get easily annoyed where it's like, it's right there. I mean, my professional life, this happens all the time. I have a few email threads every couple months where I am talking to somebody who has clearly not read what I have presented and offered them, and they will repeatedly ask their question. And then I eventually have to like very explicitly point them to the answer or give it to them in a very particular way. Sometimes I even have to call them. So we ask for phone numbers too, just so you know. Be welcoming. One of the things, I spoke a little bit about this yesterday, we always have somebody who, usually me, because I'm not a controller or a player, who's essentially an observer, who walks around during the game and makes sure that controller has water, that the controllers have food, and that our players seem happy. You know, is there somebody who's sitting down who hasn't gotten up in a while and doesn't seem to be interacting? We've had a couple games where somebody was clearly dragged by somebody else on the team, and they're sitting there and they don't look happy. But if a controller approaches them and asks them, hey, what's going on? Can I encourage, you know, like, all right, do you understand the rules? What can I do to make this a good experience for you? That player has historically usually gotten quite involved. So that's all for us part of logistics. That's all part of our strategy to ensuring that this is a positive experience. This is a picture from one of our, this is our last Watch This guys, of there's some booing going on and some chuckling going on, and this is like, you know, it's dark out. This is the point where I always get anxious in the middle of our games, where I'm like, we got to get out of here soon. We have so much cleanup to do. People are fried. I got to get you all dinner. You know, I think we're rounding about 8 o'clock here in the evening, and we start our games, we open our doors at 9 usually, so it's been a long day. But they're happy. These are very happy players. They're loving this experience. They want to talk about what they just experienced. So the debrief is a really important part of our process, and it's an important part of rounding out the experience. But the final thing that we really do, the two things that we do for our experiences, is that we always ask for feedback. We ask for feedback from everybody. And we have, of course, our Discord servers, and we will have always a few people who are very enthusiastically typing and sharing for days and figuring out what happened. And that's great. And we want to make sure we're also there as part of that, and that we haven't dropped off just because we're exhausted. So, I have surveys that I ask of our players. I have surveys that I ask of our controllers, and I also ask we have sort of for the smaller group of planners, our core group, we also have a debrief usually. What I will say is that our survey is based off of what the Megagame makers have used for a number of years. Very early on, maybe even with Sengoku, I reached out to Dave and just said, hey, what do you guys do for your feedback? And he's been tracking, and they've been tracking for a number of years with extraordinary data. And so that was important to us to also try to figure out. I think that they do it much better than we do. But the intention was to have a similar sort of thread, so that maybe eventually we're looking at actually what does it internationally look like. So if you're not already doing that, it's an important piece. We've actually, as wasteful and as difficult as it is, we solicit them in person while they are still at the game for players. So we actually create a time before the debrief usually to sit down and to fill out their survey. So you actually are sort of compelling them to do it. Otherwise they just won't, you know, a handful will, but you just won't get it. So we do that. We read through them. We have a couple of volunteers who type it all up for us. It's time consuming, but it's good because it means that next time we're taking that information and we're improving the experience. And as a result, I think we have built up a bit of a stronger player base. So I can't stress that enough. We are always taking notes for improving next time. I encourage that as a practice. I think it's a really good way to make sure that you're on point with what you're doing. You're responding to what didn't work well for the controllers, what was, you know, was there something not clear in the rules that we need to address next time? What is the player input about certain things that worked or didn't work? Some years we've had lunch, some years we've not had lunch with games. That's always a big challenge for us. Like I said, communicate proactively, always try to do that. It's tough, but like if you're doing this, do it right. Again, play to your strengths, and also play well with others and make sure you're incorporating what they have as strengths to contribute to your volunteer team. I fundamentally believe that chaos is avoidable. So try to figure out what you can do to avoid the chaos that is not just 80 people running around at the same time. And if you have 80 people running around at the same time, which directions are they going in, and do they know where to go, and sort of have a little bit of that, some thought to that. And then I think with anything, but especially with event planning and mega game hosting, you need to, you really need to think about the thing that motivates and inspires you in a mega game, right? So for me, it's constantly that I really love to see what happens when people are interacting. I love to see where the communication drops happen. I love how the one thing that a controller said that was like them on the fly throws the whole game into a very strange story and the narrative. And so I encourage you to always know what that thing is that you're on about, because that's going to energize you. So that's it for me for now. You know, not maybe the topic that everybody thinks about, but happy to take any questions that you might have, or if you have anything else to share. I really appreciate you guys being here with me and letting me jabber at you for 45 minutes, apparently. Clearly, I'm enthusiastic about the logistics of mega games, and hopefully some of these things are helpful. Like I said, I have templates if you want them, if you're new to mega games, for budgets, also task lists that I think about timelines for things. I even have some of the emails that I send out to people, whether they're controllers or they're players. You can do all that if you want, and you can also look and see what somebody else has to offer, and make use of that if you would like. So I think that's it from me for now. You should have the ability to unmute if you want to chime in. You're welcome to. Otherwise, that's it.
I have a quick question. So I think you had mentioned like talking to other organizations and things like that for running mega games. How has that discussion been different compared to when you're producing the whole thing yourself, like going to venues?
So like partnering up and we're running it for them kind of thing, or
yeah, like at a school, university, convention, yeah.
So I'm really frank. I think that like a lot of conventions more and more are really interested in mega games, but they're not actually interested in giving the space for them. And so we get, especially like if it's a new convention, they'll come and they'll say, hey, this sounds like a really cool thing. My friend pointed this out to me. I'd love to have you guys. And then I'm like, okay, well, we typically have 40 to 50 people. We prefer if they pre-reg so that we can actually assign or cast them, because that's how most of our games run. We need X amount of space. Walking them through those logistics is really helpful. I will sometimes also send them some timelines and some other logistical considerations. And then we also, unless they came to us and they said explicitly, I want you to run the world turned upside down or something, we'll tell them what games we have that we're able to offer them. We have, I think, for most of our games now, wikis too, so we can also pop them over to the rules a little bit so they understand that. If you're talking to somebody who understands what a mega game is, that's a little bit of a different conversation. So I think that's an advantage we now have with Gen Con, right? Gen Con understands a little bit more. But when we initially in 2016 went to Gen Con, and even I think when Chicago Mega Games initially went to Gen Con, and I think it was 2015 for them, nobody had an idea, right? And so we had to argue for the space that we needed. We had to argue for the amount of tables we needed. We had to argue why, and we still do have to have conversations about, hey, look, we really, really need to be able to move our tables around sometimes. And when you're in certain spaces, they can't. So you have to figure that out. So those are things that we have definitely learned over time and that are pretty important. We ran a game for a person who clearly thought it was going to be a moneymaker. And it was fine, and we put in a whole lot of time, and we were really clear. I was like, this is not a moneymaker. I'm glad you have the venue, that's fantastic, but you know, once you start thinking about the fact that you have people in the space for a certain amount of time, you're going to have to feed them, or you're going to have to sell lunch, or you're going to have to let them bring in food and then give them time. You're going to have Wi-Fi, you're going to have the ability for a PA system, all these things. Like, people don't think about these things. Once you really start to articulate that, I think that's really helpful, and I've learned over time to be really upfront with people about that. So I have way more conversations with people who are interested in mega games than, of course, fight for them. So it's just like they when they realize the scope of what's needed to run, I think, a really good game. And we also, it's not to say like we're stuck on it. We're willing to talk about the things that we think are absolutely essential, the things that we think make it better. Yeah.
Have you done any corporate stuff? Anything with a little bit better ticket price or a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked to groups that have wanted for us to come in and run games for them as like their team building. and I referred to the fact that we've done it for high school students. So we went and did for 9th and 10th graders for a history block that they had on the
Okay.
American Revolution, which is when we got involved with the world turned upside down. But for the corporate scene, we haven't ever done it. We've talked to an awful lot of groups about doing it. And what they realize is even with how accessible we try to make mega games, they're concerned that it won't be for everybody.
Right.
And that there'll be grumpy people who feel like they have to be there because they're on the clock. We've looked at some like larger companies that have board game groups or do social events that might opt in, and had a lot of conversations where like they had somebody who came to our game and that person was really enthusiastic, went back to their social committee or whatever it was. And those people often, they're interested, but it's again just the logistics where they start to realize, oh, people would have to be here for how long, doing, you know, like that's hard for people. So I think if you have a game where there isn't too much motion, and it's still accessible, and perhaps in some cases a little bit more lighthearted in theme. So if theming does really matter, theming is actually probably one of the biggest things for corporates, sort of corporate appeal, then you probably have more of a foot in. So if you can design a game or have access to a game that's like that, it would be much more attractive.
I was talking after the one of the sessions yesterday with NSDM guys. They were talking about a lot of pressure from the conventions and stuff for shorter games. And it's what you just said. You know, there seems to be this back pressure, this pressure
Yeah.
that these 6 hour, 8 hour, 10 hour games just can't happen, and they're pushing more of a 2 to 4 hour kind of a thing. Do we have to start adjusting our gaming to fit this pressure?
Well, and I think that there's a magic to a certain amount of time being together and having a certain amount of pressure. We've also tried just for fun to see what happens if you just pull it like one game, like one part of the game, and the sub game becomes the game. It's just not the same. It kind of falls flat. Like the sub games sort of tend to have such simplicity in their mechanics that it's just not as appealing for people to engage in that being the game. So there's something about the relationship and the interconnected thing of things that's really important. But for those things to also, I think, be really visible to people, it has to have a certain amount of time. Like the tension has to build.
Right.
Now, what's really interesting is with all the virtual games that are forming, there's, I think, a new opening there. Like, I wasn't able to experience Lucidian, but I'd be really interested in learning more about how that went. It's a shorter game. It's accessible. I think they have, from what I can tell, a really great UI. So that's a thing. Similarly, we've gotten really interested in digitizing games to make them more accessible and to make it perhaps more accessible in particular to corporate groups that you're right there. You're going to get people who might find that easier than running around bits of paper and all these things. So
if the corporate groups were able to pay a little more and the mega gaming groups had a little more budget, well, then it'd be a little easier to get these venues and to make a higher product.
yeah.
So the business part can't be, you know, with good business comes more better product.
For sure. It is a catch-22, and I think that's part of it. Like and I think that's part of why WCM is going into the direction of finding which aspects can be digitized without losing that experience of the face-to-face, having a really well-trained controller who's there to help guide you and to answer questions. But can we cut down on some of the things that take up a lot of time? And so, I mean, I think there are lots of different answers to this. It depends on the direction. Again, it depends on the goal. We're not in it for the money. We're in it because we really love it, but we also don't want to lose more money. And frankly, we have. So, you know, that's a reality to contend with. And again, I think that's why if you have a venue resource, especially, you're so lucky and you don't even know.
Can I, if you don't mind if I interject regarding conventions?
Yeah.
So like the conversations I've been having with the folks over at like the Penny Arcade Expo and even like board game conventions is that there's kind of a player throughput that's a bit more important. So the conversations that, you know, the things that they're asking of us are typically not like, you know, if you want to have a 8-9 hour game, that's fine, but it's more of, can you support a throughput of, you know, 100 people per hour to, you know, like they want to see how many people you can engage at any given time. So even if you do an 8-hour game, if you could support 200 people, they don't mind
totally
that.
about it.
Yeah. So it's also I think the way that a lot of convention runners see convention goers, or that a lot of those people want to hit as many things as possible. So like, you know, like you're going to a theme park, you want to do this, you want to have a session for D&D and then go to play a board game, then go do something else.
Yeah,
so I think that's the shorter time request is kind of asking for that same, it's like the negotiation for their side to say like, well, how many people can you actually help, right? And so if you can fill in space for 200 people during your one day at the convention, then they're much more happier than saying like, well, we can only support 50 players and we're going to take up this whole room for 8 hours, you know?
Yeah, or multiple rooms depending. So
right, exactly.
I'm super mindful that I want to make sure that people can get to the watch party. Does anybody have any last questions? I'm happy to continue in Discord. Like I said, I'm happy also to answer any questions at any point and talk about what you're encountering. Not a lot of people want to talk about this, but I love to talk about it. So really happy to be here. But I do want to make sure that we're available to join on Twitch for the next session and watch this guy's video. And the con's wrapping up here. So I'm so grateful you guys were here to listen. Like I said, that might just be me. So, feel free to hop over to Twitch and be part of the watch party. And if you want in the next couple of weeks or whenever, just chime into the MGC Discord and I'm happy to talk more about logistics. So thank you guys for being here. Take care.